After World War II, a defeated Germany was divided among the victors, the United States, France, Britain, and the Soviet Union. The western portion was divided among the Americans, the British, and the French. The eastern portion of Germany was claimed for the USSR under communist rule. The capital city, Berlin, was located deep within the Soviet sector of Germany. Berlin, a city of 2 million, was supplied by the British, French, and American societies by land, air, and water routes. By 1948, it became clear that the Western powers, the United States, France, and Britain, intended to rebuild Germany. These ideas were to change currency, German unifications, and Soviet war reparations. As for the East, the Soviets did not want Germany to have the chance to change. The USSR rather have Germany be more pliable to become communist. This led to no compromises in any of East Germany's government. East Germany stopped trains headed to Berlin on June 1st and June 10th. In a final move to stop the Western powers and their ideas, all land and water access to Berlin was called off as a result of the Soviets. Since Berlin got most of their supplies from West Germany, Berlin would no longer be supplied. These events would lead to starvation and dehydration if nothing was to happen.
As the blockades formed, the plan of ground invasions would end up leading to World War III, but the threat did not stop General Lucius Clay from formulating a complete strategy to invade East Germany. By invading East Germany, the Western societies could then reach Berlin and reopen the trading and supply routes to West Germany. Knowing that this will lead to World War III, Sir Brian Robinson, the British commander, had a proposition on how to deal with the transportation of food and other necessities to supply Berlin. His major idea was to use 2 air paths to airlift food into Berlin. This would be complicated because West Berlin had only 2 airports, Tempelhof, which was located in the American sector, and Gatow, which was located in the British sector. The only aircrafts available to the Americans at the time were 102 C-47s and 2 C-54s. The C-47s had 2 1,200 horsepower engines with the capability to carry up to 25,000 pounds. As for the C-54 Skymaster, this plane had 4 1,450 horsepower engines and the capability of carrying up to 73,000 pounds. On June 26, 1948, the first C-47s landed at Tempelhof Airfield, foreshadowing the great operation that was to come. General Smith, commander of USFA, dubbed the mission Operation Vitals. As for the British, they just called it Operation Planfair.
It was determined that the city's daily food ration would be 646 tons of flour and wheat, 125 tons of cereal, 109 tons of meat and fish, 180 tons of dehydrated potatoes, 180 tons of sugar, 11 tons of coffee, 19 tons of powdered milk, 5 tons of whole milk, which was quoted as milk, the new weapon of democracy, 3 tons of fresh yeast, 144 tons of dehydrated vegetables, 38 tons of salt, and 10 tons of cheese. The total came to 1,534 tons. These supplies didn't include the need of coal and fuel. In fact, the largest quantity of supplies needed was coal. It was used to heat houses and help run industries. Coal was also the trickiest supply to send to Berlin because the dust corroded cables and electrical connections, and crews complained of breathing problems. Eventually, surplus army duffel bags were supplied and used to hold the coal dust and decrease the dust. It was determined that 3,475 tons of supplies would be needed daily. Since the C-47s could only carry 3.5 tons, they would have to make 1,000 flights each day. This task was impossible. The American General Lucius Clay, determined that with the limited amount of airplanes available, his fleet could only hold about 300 tons a day to Berlin. The British effort was capable of carrying 750 tons a day. This left a 2,425-ton deficit daily. Realizing that this amount of tonnage was too much for the amount of planes he had in possession, General Clay and General LeMay made requests for more C-54s since they could carry 3 times more cargo than the C-47s. So on June 27, 1948, 52 C-54 Skymasters were ordered to Berlin.
On June 28, 1948, the Berlin Airlift initiated. As planes arrived in both airports, Gatow and Tempelhof, the U.S. and British forces began loading tons and tons of cargo into C-47s and C-54s. Most salty goods were transported by the short Sunderlands, or seaplanes. These short Sunderland's 1,010 horsepower engines were capable of carrying 18 tons of cargo. Planes took off every 90 seconds around the clock. They maintained that interval for a 170-mile flight, not moving an inch from the set speed, route, or altitude. When they arrived in Berlin, they were allowed only one landing attempt. If they missed their mark, they would have to go back to the base. The reason was that there was too many planes that also needed to land behind them. As each plane landed in Berlin, the pilot stayed in the plane as a snack wagon went around giving them food, and weathermen arrived in jeeps giving them the weather for the flight back. As soon as volunteer Germans unloaded the cargo, the plane would take off. As the planes were in the air, the Soviets would harass the pilots using searchlights to blind the pilots and balloons in hope to hit a plane and damage them.
Consequently, the Soviets entered into negotiations which accumulated into an agreement. Signed on May 12, 1949, the Soviets decided it was time to lift the blockade. This did not settle the issue of freedom of access. The Berlin Airlift continued until September 30th to mass a reserve of food, fuel, and other supplies. Between June 26, 1948 and September 30th, 1949, the Berlin Airlift delivered more than 2.3 million tons of cargo. 75% of that cargo came from the American aircrafts. The American air crews made 277,685 flights and nearly 600,000 flying hours, and exceeding 92 million miles, which is the distance from Earth to the Sun. Nevertheless, breaking the blockade cost the lives of 30 American servicemen and 1 civilian in 12 crashes in the Berlin Airlift. The Berlin Airlift worked because of excellent cooperation of the Allies. The Americans, British, and the French, along with the remarkable stamina of the German people, withstood the enormous challenge made by the Soviets to completely seal off the city of Berlin. The 3 air corridors, which had been agreed upon at the end of World War II, allowed the Allies to deliver enough food, coal, medicine, and the industrial supplies to allow the people to survive. The Russians did not believe we could maintain the effort and finally realized the blockade would not work and gave up.
These statements were quoted from Louis D. Whipple, a former supply clerk in the Berlin Airlift. When Justin Giovantone, captain of the U.S. Air Force, was asked why the Berlin Airlift worked, he responded with this statement.
American ingenuity, persistence, and determination, particularly from newly created U.S. Air Force, were responsible for the success of the Berlin Airlift. The British Air Force was also involved, but to a lesser extent.
When Louis D. Whipple was asked, was the Berlin Airlift a triumph or a tragedy, and why, he replied with stating this.
The Berlin Airlift was a triumph as the Allies prevailed over the Soviets in their attempt at domination. It was also tragic for the German population as they had to suffer food and coal shortages. But we must remember, it was the German people who had supported Hitler's rages through Europe. I believe that outcome should be considered a triumph in our history.
The Berlin Airlift was in fact a definite triumph, because as Whipple said, the Berlin Airlift was a triumph as the Allies prevailed over the Soviets in their attempt at domination. Without the help of the U.S. and British governments, this triumphant event would have gone to the killing of the majority of Berlin citizens.